Underneath this tarp is one of the best motors that Honda's ever built, and no one seems to care about it. Okay, let's do the reveal in 3, 2, 1. How's it going, everyone? Today is going to be a very special day because we are going to go pick up the motor that's going to be going into the FRS. So as I told you before, it's going to be a turbo swap. We're going to put some funky transmission in there to make it all work and shift really quick. That's a hint. We are just about to go off on a 2-hour road trip to Sterling, Ontario. So that's about 2 hours away from Toronto. To go pick up this motor from a recycler's. Stick around in this video. I'm going to talk about why we decided to go with this motor. Now, the motor itself is a very common motor to use for swaps. However, the variant that we're going to use is a bit controversial, and I'll go through why I think it is the perfect choice for what we're trying to do, especially for a forced induction build. So stick around, we'll get into the details. All right, now let's do the reveal in 3, 2, 1. Wow, that was a fail. Oh! So the cat's out of the bag. It is a K24. Now I know what you're thinking, Jason. Everyone and their mother knows that a K24 is one of the best motors ever built, and people love to swap them. But what people are usually referring to as a K24 swap is the K24A2 or the JDM K24A, which came out of the 06, 08 era of TSXs. And the K24A2 is super popular just as a straight swap, turbo swap, as well as a Frankenstein build where you put a K20 head onto the K24 bottom end. Now what we have today is actually the K24 Z7, one of the two popular Z variants, the other one being the Z3. So what makes the K24 Z7 a bit of a quirky motor, and why is it less desirable? And most importantly, why do we choose to go with the Z7 when it comes to our long-term FRS track build? Well, the answer might be a little bit surprising because from this angle, this looks like just any other K24. Underneath the plastic manifold, you would see 4 intake ports, and just like the K24A model, it has VTEC on the intake side. Now, what's different is when you spin around to the back side, you'll notice that there's a singular exhaust port. Now, the K24Z lacks VTEC on the exhaust side. Now, of course, with a single exhaust port, the head does not flow as well as the K24A. But what it lacks in flow, it makes up in packaging. A huge advantage for us when we build the turbo manifold is that we don't have to deal with 4 ports. It only has to essentially be a flange connected to a V-band. It makes it super simple. We'll be able to reduce a lot of the size, keep the turbo away from things like the battery, from the side of the chassis, and tucked closer to the engine here. And if you follow a lot of K-swap turbo builds, you'll see a lot of times people are always asking for, oh, where did you get your manifold from? Who built your manifold? And they tend to be very custom pieces. And for me, I didn't want to have to go through the hassle of doing that custom fabrication. If it's something that does crack in the future, you want it to be fairly easy to replace. It just seems like a more elegant solution to just do 1 port to 1 port when it comes to managing the exhaust manifold. Now, if this were an NA build, I would have definitely gone with a K24A or a K24A2 just to make use of that high flow. But because this is going to be a turbo setup, anything we lose from having a lower flowing head, we can just make up by turning up the boost ever so slightly to hit our goal. Beyond the exhaust port, there are a few other differences. The K24 Z7 supposedly has the strongest OEM rods of all the K24 variants. It also comes with a 50-degree VTEC gear from factory on the intake side. And critically, it actually does not have VTEC on the exhaust side. You'll see that when we do decide to take off the valve cover, that the cam on the exhaust side is not like the cam on the intake side, which has 3 lobes. And I think that's just to pair with how they decided to do the exhaust. Maybe for emissions reasons, maybe it was for cost savings, maybe it was for packaging. Whatever the case, we know that the head is not going to flow as well, but again, because we're turboing, it's probably not going to matter that much. We're going to prioritize the packaging. So focus for today, we're just going to be cleaning up the motor, stripping it down for parts that we are no longer going to need for the build or things that we're going to replace. So what we'll do is essentially take the motor here, and we've already attached the motor stand bracket here, and we're going to put it on this Princess Auto motor stand over here so we can get up into the air and start taking parts off. TV magic. Now the motor is on the stand, and we're going to get to the disassembly, just stripping off all the stuff that we don't need. All right, Enrique, what do you think of our motor choice?
It's good. I always like going against the grain, you know? It's fun.
What do you think is going to be the hardest part in refreshing this thing?
Nothing.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's pretty simple. Put the pump in. That's it.
Everything's simple to this guy.
Well, you know, if you look at it long enough,
Yeah.
it will be simple enough. No, I think just yeah, nothing really hard. We just gotta refresh it. Hopefully, compression's good. If not, then
Start over.
it's more money. But it's
Well, then we'll have a spare parts engine at least at that
Yeah.
point.
No, it should be okay. These motors, even at like 300,000 kilometers, you can still see the cross hatching on the cylinder wall. So
That's crazy, yeah?
yeah, that's pretty good. This motor's pretty good. Especially this one, it looks like it's just been daily driven, so you can tell it hasn't really been hammered on.
Yeah, not like what we're about to do to it.
Yeah, man, we're gonna reset that. We're gonna just like, this is gonna live at 5,000 to 8,000 RPM the whole time.
It's like at 200K, it's like, oh, it's almost at the end of his life, but now it's getting a new life.
No,
Completely
I've
different.
met some people that have boosted these cars, like these motors, at like 250, 300,000 kilometers, and it's fine.
Yeah.
And if you break it, it's another one. You know? Or we build it and make more power.
Yep.
Yep.
I mean, if we go with the G35-900, that's going to give us so much headroom.
Yeah,
Or
I'm
whatever
pretty
we
pumped
wanna
for it.
do at
I think this motor has enough flow to spool it really good. So
Yeah.
I'm not too concerned about it being that big. High compression, so it'll spool faster for sure.
Now just imagine a nice big turbo right about here. Keep it tight to the valve cover, essentially. We just split a socket. Oh. Let's see if it will focus on this. Don't focus on my face. Whew. See that lightning bolt? It's like Harry Potter. Spent the past little while removing most of the stuff off of the motor that we're not going to be using anymore. So if we take a look over here, we have the Honda parts graveyard of things that, you know, I'll hold on to just in case we need a nut and bolt here or there, but most of that stuff we won't need anymore in the build. And of course up here we have the motor, and look at that. It is tiny when it comes mostly disassembled from all the peripheries. And if you notice, it's basically a skyscraper, right? That's always a thing that you worry a little bit about with K-swaps, is that you never know if it's gonna have enough clearance to the floor as well as to your hood, right? A lot of people have to cut something out of their hood, maybe just some of the structure, just to make it fit and close. The other scary thing is because the motor's so tall, if you're tracking this thing, if you can't get your OEM skid plate on the bottom, you have to worry about going over the berms and potentially cracking the oil pan. The other thing that's really cool about working on these Honda motors, despite how old they are, so remember this block, this motor has 200,000 kilometers on it, but if we were to take a look at the valves, that's a little bit hard to see, but let me grab a light. All right, now with our light, let's take a look inside. I don't know if you can see that, but they are basically brand new. No buildup whatsoever. Take a look at the other one. Same here. No buildup whatsoever. So I do have to admit, if we were looking inside of my GTI instead, that would have been completely gunked in carbon buildup. All right, let's do a quick walk around in the motor. So it's the front view with all the pulleys and the water pump removed. Timing chain cover in the front, we're not going to worry too much about because we will be replacing that with the K-Power one. What's really nice about the K-Power timing chain cover is that it converts the K24Z into essentially K24A as far as the timing chain cover goes, which means the crank position sensor is going to be on the front as opposed to the rear of the motor. Now let's take a look at the side of the engine. So of course, like I said, single port exhaust. We're going to put our turbo manifold up here. The turbo is basically going to be positioned right about here beside the valve cover. Now the K24Z configuration has the oil filter down in this position here. In this position here, and you see they're basically using the same casting, but this is where the K24A would have the oil filter. So we're going to see if we can do a bit of a relocation, perhaps bring it up to somewhere a little bit more accessible, because down here it's going to be really tough to get in a rear-wheel drive configuration. And we might be able to get a relocation kit that maybe flips the filter upside down, which is much easier to maintain and to clean, similar to how it is in the FRS. As you can see, the valve cover is showing its age, and we are very likely going to reuse this valve cover, mostly because it's really hard to find someone who makes an aftermarket valve cover for this that has a decent sized baffle. Now, I know that Skunk 2 does make the magnesium valve cover that does fit the K24Z. However, the baffling in that valve cover leaves a little bit to be desired, especially for a track build. So unfortunately, I do think we're gonna have to stick with the OEM one. What we'll have to do is, because we're gonna be in a rear wheel drive configuration, this side is gonna be right up against the firewall. We will have to get someone to essentially cut and weld this port. What we'll have to do is add 2 additional ports for venting. Now at this point, we're just in the process of masking off the entire motor because I want to essentially hose it down, degrease the whole thing. We are going to use 3M Roloc bristle pads to try and bring back the original luster of the aluminum block here. And part of that, of course, is for aesthetics. You know, we're putting so much time into this build. We want to make it look nice, but strategically it'll also help to identify where the motor might be leaking. In this shape, it's so dirty that, like, if it leaked oil, I would have no idea if it's something new after we reassemble everything. So being able to just clean it up, make it look like a fairly new engine will help us to really hone in on where it might be leaking oil. With the motor stripped down, it's actually a good opportunity to talk through what some of the aftermarket parts are going to be to support this turbo build, and exactly where we plan to locate things to make it as seamless as possible and to shorten the routing of all the plumbing as well. So on the front of the engine, one of the most important things that we're going to change out is the crank pulley. Now we're going to get the ATI super damper because one of the issues with the K swap, when you change out the oil pump to a Type S, you remove the balancers, and so the engine is really prone to violent shaking and vibration that a lot of people tend to have issues with cracked exhaust and flywheel bolts releasing themselves. Over here we have maxed up the OEM oil pressure port. We're going to use this as most likely the turbo feed because, you know, the turbo is going to be right here, so we get a nice feed port here. We'll just split the fitting so that we can also run the Bosch dual pressure and temperature sensor as well, and just feed the turbo from here to here. And what will be nice is we'll drain the turbo down to this examination port right here. There's a lot of aftermarket support to create essentially a plate with an AN fitting that we can just go straight there. So the oiling for the turbo is going to be nice and compact using a lot of these repurposed OEM placements. A little bit hard to see here, but there is a sensor near the back of the engine in the K24Z, which is the crank position sensor. Now, as I mentioned, with the Z variant, it's back here, and in the A variant, it's supposed to be somewhere around here. And with the K-Power timing chain cover, we are going to be able to get that K24A position back, which will simplify the harness because we're just going to get the K-Power harness that has been built around the Haltech ECU, which will simplify things. And so we want to make our engine as close as possible into a K24A as far as wiring and sensor locations go. As far as the intake manifold goes, we're just going to use the K-Power intake manifold. It is widely regarded as one of the best, and we're already ordering so much stuff from K-Power anyway, so might as well go with what comes with the kit. I think that's going to do it for this video. Next time we'll be washing down the engine, and hopefully we'll get started on removing some of that surface corrosion with those Roloc pads and show you a before and after of what the engine looks like, and hopefully, you know, it's got that nice shine back into it and you won't have any idea that this block is actually 10 years old with over 200,000 kilometers. It'll look practically brand new. As always, we're glad you're here. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you in the next video.